All right, today we're going to talk about fallacies. Many of you have heard this term before, but by the end of today, hopefully we will all be on the same page and understand this concept a little bit better. So what is a fallacy? A fallacy has a lot of different definitions, and so here are some of them. A false notion, a statement or an argument based on false or invalid inference, incorrectness of reasoning or belief, or the quality of being deceptive. Notice that all of these things really have one common element, and that is some sort of false element. And so my definition that I like to use for our class is when any component of an argument is problematic. You'll see here in this graphic that McDonald's says their hamburgers look one way, but really, even at their most attractive angle, they are lying and deceiving, and so that is a fallacy. Any sort of lie, deception, or problematic argument is a fallacy. And so I'm just going to kind of paraphrase this here. Logic doesn't seem to matter anymore in our world. You guys live in a time, unfortunately, where logic is not the primary, kind of reasoning. And so I think it's really important that you guys learn about fallacies, both for our course, but also so that you guys can make really informed decisions when you go out into the real world, so that you are not being swayed one way or another based on someone else's illogical argumentation, but also so that you don't continue to spread this sort of pattern that we have right now of arguing using fallacies. Where do fallacies appear? Everywhere. Propaganda, politics, more and more with every year that goes by in politics, advertisements, commercials, they happen everywhere. They happen in my classroom. A few years ago, I had a student who used to yell at me every time I made some sort of illogical argument with a fallacy. And he would just yell fallacies from the back of the room. It happens everywhere, and we don't really even notice that we're doing it because it's in all these places that we trust in our world, in the media, in our classrooms. And so we have to be more cognizant of this moving forward. There are three types of fallacies. We have logical, emotional, and ethical. Okay? Logical fallacies technically encompass all the kinds of fallacies. So when I use the phrase logical fallacy, it means all of them, really. But typically logical fallacies that we'll talk about in here deal most directly with formal logic. There's an issue in the structure, the logic of the argument. Either there's a critical point missing, the claim or the warrant is missing or out of order, some issue with the logic, the A plus B equals C. The structure is faulty. Emotional fallacies sound like exactly the name, where there's some sort of emotions trying to be appealed to rather than just stating the facts. And finally, ethical fallacies really talk more about what's right and wrong and question that by using something problematic. And these will start to make a little bit more sense as we start to talk about these different fallacies. So what I'm going to ask you to do right now is to pause this video, pause me, and you're going to try to access the Fallacy Notes document from Teams that I have posted under the General channel, the Files tab on the top, where I'm keeping all of our documents. You need to access this document, either print it out right now or have it open on your computer. And save it somehow. Save it into an electronic folder, save it in a binder that you're keeping for my class if you print it out, whatever. But right now, pause me and access that notes document. And then come back to me and we'll go through it quickly together. So these are the types of most common, I would say, logical fallacies. What I'm going to do for you guys right now, that I typically do when we're face-to-face, is go through the big ideas of these fallacies. I, as your AP Lang teacher, do not care if you have all of these fallacies memorized. You might be looking through the notes right now and you're like, holy moly, this is a lot. You don't need to necessarily memorize all of them. The goal here is that you can see all the different types of ways people can include illogical argumentation within their lines of reasoning. And also, we don't want to fall victim to this. We don't want to do this in our own writing. So by showing you all the different types of fallacies, I'm hoping that we'll be more aware. Some students do find it very helpful to memorize these. You can absolutely do that. It could be helpful for you. So with a highlighter or on your computer, you can highlight the big ideas, I think, for each of these types of logical fallacies. So our first logical fallacy is the non sequitur. This is the most broad and general type of fallacy. It's like big overarching. Non sequitur actually means it does not follow. In other words, the logical structure is wrong. Here's an example. If I were to say, hey, I hear rain falling outside my window, therefore the sun is not shining. There's a gap, there's a hole, there's something missing in that logical structure. When the rain is happening outside, could the sun be shining? Yes. So there's a gap in that logic, thus making it invalid. And so technically, most logical fallacies, if not all of them, fit under this non sequitur type of fallacy. A red herring fallacy is really mostly when the speaker brings up a point that is completely irrelevant, has nothing to do with the topic at hand. I've given you an example in here. You might want to pause me now and read over that example, but I think what's important to know about this one is that the speaker brings up a point that has absolutely nothing to do with the issue that is being discussed. Where does this happen often? Presidential debates. Someone could be talking about education policy and all of a sudden someone's like, hey, you approved abortions. What does that have to do with education? Nothing. Red herring's job is to try to change the subject. Okay. This next one's circular reasoning. I like to call it begging the question. Also, they're the same thing. This really just means, and if you're a visual person, think of what a circle looks like. You start out your argument and you try arguing, but somehow you end up right back to where you started, so you're not going anywhere with your argument. Circular reasoning means that you're trying to prove something that's already been proven. They're like, well, duh. This expression, it'll get better when it stops hurting. Yeah, because that's the definition of getting better. Absolutely. A book is dramatic. A book or a movie is dramatic if it includes moments of drama. That's the definition of dramatic. So, duh. Those are the duh fallacies that don't seem to be going anywhere. Equivocation is one of my favorite fallacies, and here's a picture of our former president. I don't think you were alive for him, Bill Clinton. Equivocation is a lie or misconstrued truth using deceptive language. Bill Clinton said, I remember watching him on the TV, I did not have sexual relations with that woman. He did have sexual relations with that woman. So he blatantly lied. Maybe by the term sexual relations, he was trying to divert that he didn't have sex with her, he did other things with her, whatever. But at the end of the day, equivocation, fallacy means that there is some sort of lie or deception happening. And this happens a lot in politics as well, and he was a politician. False analogy is exactly what it sounds like. It's a faulty comparison. The assumption that because two things are alike in some ways, they must be alike in other ways. And I love this example, though it might be a little bit complex. If you're comparing a fire that happened a few years ago in San Diego and were evacuated into a stadium, compare that analogy to when Hurricane Katrina happened and people were put in another stadium, the Superdome. The Superdome had death and mayhem. Because if you can remember, I'm not sure again if you were alive, Katrina just wiped out New Orleans and the surrounding areas, versus when people were evacuated to the San Diego stadium, there were Starbucks and free massages being passed around. You can't compare those two things. Just because they're both disasters does not necessarily mean that they are comparable. They're not the same in every other way. False causality, not casualty, causality. The way I remember this one is bad cause and effect. You might want to jot that down. Bad cause and effect. We've been deluged with rain the past 3 weeks, so the price of gas went up. That cause and effect doesn't make any sense. Rain does not make gas prices go up. So this is anytime you're assuming that the effect is a result of a cause, that those two things don't actually connect in terms of causation. Hasty generalization. Some of you guys talked about hasty generalization last week when we were discussing something else. It's, again, exactly what it sounds like. You are making a generalization, an assumption, hastily, quickly. You're assuming something before you actually know the answer. Prejudice, stereotyping are types of hasty generalizations. An example could be, I didn't give you an example here. Anytime we're assuming something that is faulty, I can't think of a good example here on the spot, but we can talk more about it in the coming days. Anytime you're making an assumption without all the information, you can't do that. These fallacies are not as common. Oversimplification and exaggeration are not as common, but they sound exactly like what they are. Oversimplification means you're making something seem more simple than it really is. School violence has gone up, academic performance has gone down ever since racial segregation was banned. Therefore, we must reintroduce segregation to make schools get better. You are oversimplifying a much bigger problem, and those two things don't necessarily connect either. Exaggeration, not very common. Lawyers use it quite a bit. So read over that. You can pause me and read that over if you want. Straw man. When a person just ignores how someone actually believes and twists it. If I give you guys an assignment and you don't do very well in this assignment, and then you walk around saying, well, Ms. Velasquez obviously wants me to fail at life. No, you're ignoring my position. You're ignoring my original argument, which was you need to master these skills, and you're taking it and twisting it almost. Another example, Senator Jones says that we should not fund the attack submarine program. I disagree. I can't understand why he wants to leave us defenseless like that. That's not what he's saying. And so you can't twist people's words and manipulate them. You can, but that's a fallacy. Emotional fallacies. These are pretty self-explanatory, I think. Appeals to pity. You're making someone feel sympathy. Think about all the commercials on TV with the sad little abused dogs. It's so horrible to watch. That's a fallacy. You can't try to make someone feel bad, and that's how you make the argument to get their money. Give me facts and data. That would be more logical. Appeals to fear. Anytime a government makes you feel scared and that's how they're able to communicate their argument, it's not logical. Bandwagon effect, I know you guys know this one. Just because everybody else is doing this, you should do it too. Patriotism is actually a type of bandwagon fallacy. It's not logical. When everyone else is doing something, that's not a good argument to make. A better argument would be because, this statistic and this fact and this provable point. That's logical. That's a good argument. False dilemma. It has other names. Sometimes I'll call it black and white. Sometimes I'll call it either or. This is one of my other favorites. This is when you are giving only two options to a very complex problem. You're saying you can either do your homework for my class or you can go to jail, fail at life, and then go to jail. There are a lot of options that happen in between those two. And so you absolutely cannot say that there's either this or that when there are lots of other choices. We can either build nuclear power plants or be completely dependent on foreign oil. There are some options in between that for sure.